Welcome to the Industry Wants OECD Size session. We are here to reveal the 2024 Industry Dashboard scores. I'm Karen Diaz, the project manager, and I'm so excited to see many of you from across the world joining us and seeking to learn more about the state of the garment and the footwear sector. So let's begin. In this session, I will start you off with an update on the industry we want metrics and scores. I will then hand it over to our moderator, Dr. Hakan Karaosman. He's assistant professor at Cardiff University, and he will invite our speakers for reflections. Emma Harding, an ethics and social sustainability senior manager at Pangaia, and Dr. Rubana, Vice Chancellor at the Asian University for Women and previously president of the BGMEA, and Thivya Rakini, the trade union leader at Tamil Nadu Textile and Common Labor Union, also known as the TTCU. Now, we've also reserved around 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So before starting off, I just want to let you know, please put all of your questions in the webinar chat function, and we will get to them during our panel discussion. And if we do not manage to get to your questions during this session, you can also always email us at info@theindustrywewant.com. But before getting into the data, let me give you a quick recap of the industry we want and what we are. So the Industry We Want initiative was started by ETI, Fairwear, and the SAC to accelerate progress on social, commercial, and environmental issues in the garment and footwear sector. Now, we've benefited hugely from partnership from many industry experts and widespread industry consultation and input, and our great data partners. You can see some of them on this slide. Now, to remind those of you who have participated in our activities previously, and to familiarize those of you who might be new to the industry we want, our shared vision is a garment and footwear industry that realizes its full potential to ensure dignity for workers in decent jobs, thriving businesses along the supply chain, and a positive impact on the planet. Now, as indicated in this vision statement, there are three pillars of our initiatives. The three pillars of our initiative is social and commercial and environmental. In the social pillar, our focus area is wages, specifically the gap between minimum wages and living wages in key garment producing countries. In the commercial pillar, our focus area is purchasing practices. Really, how do we leverage supplier feedback to drive positive developments in commercial relationships? And in the environmental pillar, our focus area is greenhouse gas emission and the reduction of these in line with net zero targets. Now, in partnership with Wage Indicator on Wages, Better Buying for Purchasing Practices, and Apparel Impact for greenhouse gas emission, we have been gathering data on each of these metrics since 2022. By doing so, we are able to consider potential trends in each of these areas, but also assess overall progress of the industry towards our shared vision. Now, to contextualize our score for this year that I'll be sharing with you soon, I wanted to provide you a short recap of our data from 2022 and 2023. Now, in 2022, our wages metric showed a 45% gap. In 2023, it was a 48.5 gap. So as you can see, a widening. For purchasing practices, the 2022 score was 39, while 23 score was 40, showing only a very incremental improvement, basically stagnant. For greenhouse gas emission, the score was 0.889 gigatons in 2022, while 0.897 in 2023, which indicates a moderate increase. Now let's turn to each of the 2024 scores and share a little bit more about the metric. So our first metric is purchasing practices. Now this metric uses the data gathered by the Better Buying Partnership Index, which is a brief annual survey that is available for all suppliers to rate their buyers' purchasing practices. Now this year, we received around 1,413 ratings from suppliers in 63 countries, rating 166 buyer companies. This compares with last year's 1,160-ish ratings, and from 2022, where we almost had 700. So there has been a significant jump in participation. And what do we see? From a potential range from -100 to +100, the purchasing practice score for 2024 is 48. This represents an 8-point jump from 2023. Now, the 12-point annual survey rates buyers' purchasing practices on a scale from 1 to 5. You can see here the breakdown of that feedback, where amongst the buyers rated, 63% of overall behaviors were considered those of true partners, while only 22% were the behaviors of collaborators and 16% were the behaviors of detractors. The share of these ratings stayed roughly the same to those of 2023. But what is very interesting is that 79.4% of these ratings are for preferred partners. So the results are likely to be higher because these are the best actors in the industry. And even so, despite that, even though these represent the best, it fails to hit the 50% mark of positive practices. Now, very briefly, and these are specifics that we will go in depth during our deep dive webinars on each one of these metrics later this year. You can see here a rundown of the top practices, principally good communication and fair financial practices. Now, going to the needs improvement or the bottom practices, we can see that visibility, stability, time, operational processes are still areas that remain challenging, even with the best partners in the industry. So the results reflect industry best practice rather than industry norm. Indeed, while the score offers really valuable insight, it might not fully reflect the realities and the challenges faced by suppliers, workers, and the broader industry. Therefore, we really want to see more participation, and with further cycles, we'll be able to draw more accurate conclusions. And now,
if you share the power, the whole chain becomes much stronger.
Purchasing practices are quite simply the biggest tool we have in our toolbox, I think, as brands.
I think they should be more responsible to visit more often the companies.
A supply chain is as strong as the weakest link. The weakest link, unfortunately, in our case, are the workers. So any type of margin that is missing, any type of late payment, any type of non-payment, any type of payment below the cost is going to come out of the pockets of the workers.
For us as a brand, it's definitely resilience to crises. It's definitely commitment of our partner to joint sustainable development. Is definitely transparent access to data from our supply chains and a clear understanding of what we can do better.
The best advertisement is to be socially responsible in the supply chain. There is no better advertisement than taking care of the most valuable resource. So that is the worker.
It's absolutely vital that we hear workers' voices, manufacturers' voices whenever we come up with new regulation, whenever we exchange on a high level, whenever we engage in any sort of stakeholder dialogue on our side of things, because very often we try to do something within the industry and try to create an impact that then sort of misses its target and that may even create adverse impacts within supply chains without us knowing about it. So rethinking our own behavior is absolutely key if we want to change something.
The buying teams of the brands need to be made more aware of the purchasing practices and what it means. That the true partnership can only happen when they not only look at the price, but they look at the whole picture, and they feel accountable. Manufacturers have full transparency to the NGOs as well, to third parties. They show their records, they open their books. The opposite should happen as well.
I was working in the textile industry for, I don't know, 10 years maybe. Now I want to be here for every woman, for every worker. These workers should be paid for what they are doing. They should have dignified condition, dignified wages, dignified life.
Ah, beautiful highlights from stakeholders across the supply chain speaking on purchasing practices. Next is our wage gap score, devised in partnership with the wage indicator. It shows that the average percentage gap between minimum wages and the average living wage estimate in 28 garment producing countries is 49.5%, an increase of 1% since 2023. This indicates that despite industry efforts, the average difference between legal minimum wages and living wages has slightly widened. Now, this is, of course, not new information, but it is extremely concerning that with the number of initiatives and resources that we invest in wages or living wage programs, the gap is increasing and the situation remains practically stagnant between 2023 and 2024. Now, this is an image of the data set that supports our overall metric. It contains data on minimum wages and living wages, as mentioned before, for 28 key garment producing countries. I'll kick us off by describing what the data tells us. Now, the beige column shows the lowest minimum wage applicable in the garment sector, while the turquoise bars show the range of living wage estimates available for each country. The donut indicator below each bar shows the percentage gap between the national minimum wage and the average living wage estimate for each country, and this is done in ascending order. Now, I want to encourage you to go to theindustryWeWant.com and our wages page, where you will be able to see this figure and really play around with the tableau. It's a live tool, because right now I'm just showing you a still picture. Now, some highlights. The most significant wage gap increase since last year's score has been reported in Colombia, Honduras, and Turkey. And the countries with the widest gap are China, Egypt, and India, and Indonesia. And our aim as the industry we want, of course, is for this wage gap to be zero. Now I'm going to turn it to our stakeholders.
We have to stop thinking that the products that we are buying are actually that cheap. They are not. Somebody paid for it.
We have to change the social balance we have in the world.
The worker voice have driving the industry's action. I think it's very important.
I found it, of course, disheartening. I think it really reflects on the fact on how we build our industry in not a really fair way, and that we really should accept that the work that people are doing is worth more, and we should really accept that when we go and put a product on the market, that we have a fair wage included into the price, because it is not something that is unrealistic. We can do it.
We agree that 65% is very big gap, and so the worker have to to work overtime. If the worker cannot work overtime, they quite very difficult to pay for their living costs.
51 is not a good number. around 35% of the market is informal. So these people that work in the informal market, they have no rights. They have no minimum wage, not to speak about living wage.
The brand need to take into account the worker voices. For example, the social dialogue at workplace between the worker, trade union, and the factory's management. It's very important channel for worker to raise voices, and they can bring it to the sourcing dialogue. And share it with the brand or buyer.
There's so many people in this who don't want to continue to have this industry like we have it. Just go on LinkedIn and figure out maybe the brand has a sustainability manager and drop a note and be like, hey, we also sourcing from the same facility. Do you want to have a talk? And then we have a talk about sharing audit reports and maybe sharing the cost for training, or maybe sharing the cost for an implementation of something that would increase something really great on the product on the floor. And I always want to do that only if the supplier says yes.
Don't be afraid of tackling the issue with everyone involved. Each one has their own view on the subject. But does everyone think we have a problem on that? Do we have a social problem on that? Personally speaking, I think we do. So, what can we do to get to terms in which everyone will be with benefits at the end? I think we can do it. I think we can have this discussion. And I think this is the way of doing it.
Some powerful messages from our stakeholders. Now, our third and final metric measures the greenhouse gas emissions of the sector. Presenting the total estimate emissions for the garment sector in gigatons, the score for 2024 is 0.879 gigatons. It's calculated using the most widely and representative data available, which is fiber volume data from the Textile Exchange, complemented by the greenhouse gas impact data from SAC and Worldly Higg MSI. And this data will be presented in the Roadmap to Net Zero reports later this year. Now, climate change is hitting hard, and it is hitting close to home for garment workers worldwide. Many are forced to leave their homes due to flooding in rural areas. These workers dealing with the tough mix of poverty, gender inequality, and climate challenges are among the most vulnerable communities on our planet. It is a critical issue, and we need to step up and address it urgently, because unchecked, AII estimates that emissions will grow to 1.17 gigatons by 2030, well off pace to deliver the 45% absolute reductions needed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. It will not be enough to release intermittent reports with varying data sets at unscheduled intervals. It is imperative that we have these regular updated data sets to hold the industry accountable, and we will be continuing on doing so with AII, because measurement, of course, does not change everything, but measurement can help. And as it stands, we are lacking any regular sector-wide data to understand where we are now and how fast we may be moving forward or sliding backwards as a sector. Now, this year's scores presents a very interesting picture for the industry. On the one hand, we've got greenhouse. Oh, apologies. We're first moving on to our video for greenhouse gas, and I will close off with my conclusions shortly.
Blame to develop with a circular economy model as soon as possible.
the kind of top-down ad hoc requirements that we had seen in the past I think is in no one's interest.
Partnerships are key to delivering and scaling impact. Reporting is key, I think, in terms of holding businesses to account. And I think also be honest when we're not making progress, and then subsequently creating a safe space where people can come together to find solutions for this.
Let's talk of the regulations which are already in place, like we are talking of HRDD. While we were discussing it with some of our manufacturers, I realized in many of these cases, there is a certain direction that is being given, but what it exactly entails for a manufacturer has not been specified. What are the specifics of those disclosures? If there is more detailed discussion on that, then of course it is a matter of preparing themselves and working on that.
The textile and garment industry needs focus on the changing courses to increase the use of bioenergy and other renewable energy sources and support study on the biomass supply chain.
When it comes to GHG emissions, since it is very technology driven today, especially when you're trying to capture the data, that's one area we would need both some knowledge sharing on the ideal benchmarks of the various activities and the kind of optimal GHG levels they should have, but more importantly, data capturing and managing tools.
We need to increase the use of renewable energy, improve efficiency in production processes, promote the use of eco-friendly material, and reduce transportation emissions. Innovation collaboration between brands and manufacturers is important. Both sides need to work to talk to identify the hot topics such as waste, GSD to work together.
We need to be brave and we need to lead where we can. I would hope that business leaders are looking into the future and seeing that legislation is the bare minimum, and to really progress in this, they need to be exceeding this. So as we naturally progress and see that legislation comes in, businesses need to be aiming higher and doing more at a faster pace.
I'm very glad that I paused to be able to allow the stakeholders respond on the greenhouse gas emissions score. Now, I think that this year's industry dashboard presents a really interesting picture. On the one hand, as you've heard and seen, greenhouse gas emission and wages see incremental increases or drastically stagnating, while on the other hand, we've seen a better result from this year's purchasing practice metric, indicating that the better actors in the industry are investing in better sourcing dialogues. Meanwhile, this is a pivotal moment for the garment sector. Emerging sector norms and public regulations are challenging the traditional business model, pushing towards a paradigm shift rooted in shared supply chain responsibility and very much reinforced by human rights and environmental due diligence. Now, this transformative approach demands real active engagement and collaboration between brands and manufacturers. Disrupting the previous trend of brands maybe offloading responsibility onto manufacturers. With human rights and environmental due diligence, therefore, it holds the potential to address these power imbalances by enabling more equitable sourcing dialogues and opening up new avenues to empower workers. Now, at the heart of these equitable sourcing dialogues lies the recognition that interpersonal connections are fundamental. A shift towards a more inclusive and a more person-centric industry will foster sustainable practices that actually benefit the sector and improve the lives of all of those involved. Now, this shift embedded in responsible purchasing practices represents a critical puzzle piece, which has the power to stimulate improvements in social and environmental practices across the entire industry. Over the next few years, the industry we want will be looking to support the drive towards industry transformation as a resource for you, as a facilitator, and importantly, as an ally for underrepresented voices. Now I'm happy to be handing it over to our moderator, Dr. Hakan, and the speakers. Thank you.
Karen, thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. We are so pleased to have you here. So welcome to our session. And I really wholeheartedly appreciate the industry we want for this amazing panel and discussions, also to the OECD for hosting us. So today is so important because we really need to empower the workers and the communities and supply chain stakeholders. So transformation requires social dialogues, and these social dialogues must be formed with the voices from the supply chain, not top-down decisions or top-down governance structures, but really community-led actions and holistic change. My name is Hakan Karaosman. I'm an assistant professor at Cardiff University, and I'm a social scientist. And my research actually looks at just transition and decarbonization. And I look at fashion supply chains to understand how we can put workers front and center in this transformation. And I'm really thrilled to be joined by three fantastic speakers to represent the entire supply chain. But before I introduce them to the stage, I want to set the scene to accentuate why we need this conversation more than ever. To step back, fashion sector is still driven by financial indicators. We are still trying to understand how business can grow in a more sustainable way. But this is the way in which we frame the sustainability problem in a very difficult and actually problematic way. We approach sustainability as a risk mitigation tool. We are failing to understand that supply chains are social ecological structures and living systems in which workers and supply chain stakeholders are real entities. They are not tools or machines. We talk about the people in the system. So to transform the business setting, we need to ensure social dialogues with these people. But my research and supply chain management research shows that actually the fashion industry is driven by top-down decision-making and lack of engagement and lack of inclusion in decision-making. So if we want to be serious about decarbonization, we have to put the workers at the center, which requires responsible purchasing and top-down, not top-down, bottom-up conclusions and dialogues with the workers. So let's start, but let's unlock the power imbalance. Power relations are imbalanced in the fashion sector, and I'm so thrilled to actually represent these different perspectives today to underline how power relations can be actually restructured to make sure we are empowering the workers and the suppliers in these conversations, because top-down or one-size-fits-all solutions will not save us. Last but not least, technology is just a tool. What is needed is behavioral and cultural change. We can't change the fashion sector with technology for decarbonization. If we just jump on technology as a solution, we will fail ultimately, because we need behavioral change with responsible actions. So let's start. I'm really thrilled to bring three different perspectives. We have three great speakers. We will have the brand perspective from Pangaia, and Emma Harding, Ethics and Social Sustainability Senior Manager, will join us to understand how business model can be transformed in responsible ways. And then we will leave the floor to the supplier perspective. And Dr. Rubana, Vice Chancellor of Asian University for Women, but also ex-president of Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporter Association, will talk about responsible purchasing to make sure suppliers will be empowered in this transformation. And last but not least, we will bring the workers to the spotlight. In the videos, we heard one fundamental sentence: someone pays this. That is the worker. Workers are always the most marginalized and vulnerable communities, which we should cherish. And with Thivya Rakini, trade union leader at Nadu Textile and Common Labor Union, we will talk about the workers and how we can actually create new priorities to make sure workers are empowered and protected in this systemic transformation. So let's kick the discussion and let's start. So I want to bring Emma to the stage. Emma, nice to see you. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. And I just want to start with you with this honest conversation, building from your experiences and learning experiences from these conversations in the space. I want to understand how you as Pangaia actually transform the business setting in responsible ways, your takeaways or experiences. How do you think this big transformation can be tackled in socially and ecologically responsible ways? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think to address this, we need a really multifaceted approach that addresses all the various aspects that traditionally get seen in isolation. So even talking about the social and the environmental, it needs to be intersectional. And when looking at things like the greenhouse gas indicator that was just shared, it needs to be a culmination of both actions, measurements, reporting, but also not allowing a stagnation or even what seems to be an improvement to halt our process. So at Pangaia, from the very beginning, it's been part of our business model to prioritize environmental and social considerations and recognize that it's a collective responsibility. We might be small, but we are proud to work with many different partners along our supply chain. And it is through that partnership, that innovation, that we are actually able to enact some change. So a couple of things that stand out to me that I want to comment on, it's our sourcing strategy and purchasing practices that are at the heart of our ambition to move away from ubiquitous materials. So those are the conventional materials that really are bringing negative impacts, both environmentally through lots of greenhouse gases, but also socially. So actually trying to look at what the core business is about has been fundamental to us moving forward in our journey and promoting innovation through not just material development, but also the way we engage with our partners. So that's very key, listening to our stakeholders and wanting to collaborate and understand better their local contexts. We hear a lot about the just transition, but really that means understanding what is going on at the moment and who is going to be impacted. So having a holistic risk assessment of how a business can understand the needs and putting people at the heart, but also the risks to the business if you don't do anything is really important. And bringing people along on our journey has been another great thing that I think we've been really keen to do and would like to do more of, and always have an open invite to anyone who wants to learn more about how we work as a business to come and have a dialogue with us. That's very much how we work with our suppliers. So it's also understanding from them the real-time implications, both socially and environmentally, that they're feeling in their local context, but also what we can do to keep with that people-centered approach to reduce the impact of climate, but also unfair and unequal labour practices that we know exist. And where we do find something, how we can actually facilitate change. This can't be done alone. It has to be in collaboration, and it has to be done with both the people and planet side brought together. I think there's a couple of things that I can talk through that we've done a little bit more of, but I feel like if there's anything else on reporting, measurements, metrics, then I would encourage anyone to see the data behind what we've been doing in our reports and talk more about the different initiatives in some questions afterwards.
Perfect, Emma, brilliant. Thank you so much. And we will come back with further questions in the Q&A session. But you said something really important, context-specific solutions, which come from supply chain stakeholders, because suppliers, manufacturers, and the workers have tacit knowledge and ideas, which we should learn from. So moving towards context-specific solutions for just transformations, just transitions, and decarbonization, suppliers are the most important actors. This is where real things are really happening. So I want to bring actually now Rubana to the floor and to the phone. And responsible purchasing is at the heart of everything, because all the solutions require money, time, and energy. So I really want to unlock with you the responsible purchasing angle. What do you think? Well, actually we can help the suppliers to transform the industry? How can we empower them? And how do you think purchasing practices should be more responsible to unlock this big change?
Thank you so much for the question. The first thing that I'm going to say is I'm a supplier myself. I mean, of course, I have suppliers also as manufacturer, but I'm a supplier myself. So it's often a very tough spot for a supplier to be commenting on purchasing practices because all my brands and buyers are listening in. So I think the whole industry needs a lot of transparency. I think we're often not saying enough, loud enough, deep enough. Very often we are just skimming the surface and ticking all the boxes of compliance, whether it's social or even ethical or structural compliance. But the point is, do we really mean good business? Is the intention there to change the perspective and the positioning of the industry? So far, as it stands, there are brands, there are unions, and there are manufacturers. And all these three critical stakeholders are often engaged in a blame game. So if you ask me, I'm just going to say the buyers are not paying enough. If you ask the buyers, they're going to say the supplier isn't efficient enough. That's why we are paying low, because they could actually make more use of the money if they were more efficient. And if you ask the trade unions, they're just going to say that, you know, maximum manufacturers or employers are unfair. So it is a blame game, which is a very vicious cycle that we are all caught up with. So if you're going to ask me whether purchasing practices could be better from the buyer's end, of course, absolutely. I mean, how could that be better? Is it just about paying a better price? Or is it more about being involved with the supplier and being a good partner and hand-holding through the difficult times? You know, when COVID happened, seriously, Hakan, we faced a nightmare in Bangladesh. The manufacturers just canceled. The brands just canceled right, left, and center. It was a knee-jerk reaction, literally, to the pandemic. And they just said, you know, everything's closed, so we won't be able to pay you. We won't be able to take your goods. Now, that was a serious blow for the manufacturers because ultimately the workers would not be paid if we did not receive the money from the brands. At the end, they all sat across the negotiation table. Some accepted some goods with a discount. Some said, I'm going to take it next season, next year. Some said, I'm going to do a deferred payment. So instead of at sight, you'll be paid after 360 days. So it was absolutely heart-wrenching for us to go into that direction and then, you know, engage with the buyers one by one. Why would a manufacturing landscape be riddled with tensions which emanate from the buyers' end and also from the workers' end? We should have a win-win situation for all. Why would there be a difference between minimum wage and living wage and even fair wage? Why are we so unfair? I'm glad to see that Bangladesh isn't one of the worst four. Thank God for that. But the question is, even we could be doing a lot better. What is it that's stopping us? And what's stopping us is very critical. It's actually price. And that is the most critical thing. The buyers are not paying us enough. And unfortunately, whenever there's a pressure on prices, the buyers are most of the buyers are telling us increase efficiency, and then you'll see profits, which is never the case. And unfortunately, the workers absolutely, I think they are, as you said, the most vulnerable stakeholder of all, sandwiched between us and the buyers, and they're the ones who need the most respite. So in order to have a nice industry, a more efficient and a more fair industry, we should all be in it together and give up our blame game. Thank you.
Rubana, thank you so much. Lots of to unpack here, and we will come back to you with further questions. But just a quick summary for everyone that listens to us. Actually, going back to your question, why are we still having this conversation? It's because because the bidding is still driven by the growth logic. And then we are trying to actually still creating cost reduction and operational efficiency strategies, which then result in complex supply chains. So actually the logic of the business setting must be transformed. And that's why we need to really challenge the culture of the supply chain in the fashion sector, because the way we frame things are still just trying to empower the power holder at the expense of the workers. And you said something so important, love. We don't love enough. Empathy and kindness are the most important constructs in any sort of just transition. So we really have to make sure we are actually bringing those emotional constructs to the front line. And also, again, you said something so important, othering is not the way forward. It is not me and you. It is actually us, we as the collective. And then transparency is the golden thread that connects all of these issues together, which brings me to the next question to the workers. So I am so thrilled to have you here, Thivya. You are a worker representative, you are a union leader. And my mother, my late mother, was a garment worker. So to me, garment workers are so important. So I just want to leave the floor to you. And how can we empower the workers? How can we put you all front and center to shuffle everything in the system? The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Hi, wishes to all, and thank you so much, Hakan, for this wonderful opportunity to be here at this major platform. Really, as workers, we are honored to be representative of this forum. Thank you for your question. Most of the world's clothes and shoes continue to be produced in the global South Asia, Eastern Europe, Latin America, and Africa. The problems in the garment industry we have been talking about for the last 20 years, they continue to exist. And to be very honest, change that genuinely improves worker well-being has been very minimal to none. Workers continue to receive poverty-level wages. Workers are continuing to face extreme harassment when they join trade unions. And GBVH is particularly worse as we move down the supply chain. If anything, the culture of excessive social audits to the last decade has made things much worse in production regions, as there are extraordinary levels of fear among workers now to open up about the violence they face, as they think it will lead to brands leaving factories. Now, all of us here have the power to definitely change this. Brands who are the kingmakers in the supply chain with their suppliers must change directly in meaningful, regular social dialogue with global South trade unions. Social dialogue cannot be limited to the global sphere, and brands must not limit themselves to talking to international actors alone. Social dialogue has to become a reality in the local sphere, and only then can it address multiple violations in the factory floor, from health and safety to GBVH. There might be cultural differences, language differences, etc. among us, but there has to be a long-term mindset to work through these differences, and we can say we are willing to do that. Also, importantly, direct dialogue and engagement with local trade unions in production countries has to be done, not just when we have rape or murder cases in supplier factory, but regularly when brands source from a region or when think about their human rights policy. I have personally seen suppliers and brand representatives who engage in a regular dialogue with us on handling worker issues in their factories. And I can say that such suppliers very rarely see extreme cases of violence in their factory floor, and workers are generally happier, and as a local dialogue system is well functioning, and complaints are quickly resolved through systems that are best suited for the local context. Secondly, we need to move from voluntary commitments from brands and suppliers to binding agreements. that ensure decent work and living wages for the workers in the supply chain. I understand there is a lot of fear of binding agreements, but my experience has been that binding agreements can be much more fruitful for all parties than voluntary agreements. Binding agreements create long-term relationships and trust between suppliers, trade unions, and brands. And this can go a long way in creating mature industrial relations, which can really improve productivity, worker retention, and worker well-being. We have seen this over the last 2 years in the Dindigul Agreement to eliminate GBVH, that is gender-based violence and harassment. And also, most importantly, we need brands to source from suppliers who are willing to change their bad practices and are engaging in genuine social dialogue by being part of binding agreements with local trade unions in their regions. I think I have done that for the questions you made to me, Hakan. Thank you so much.
Thivya, thank you so much. It was really empowering and really inspirational. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective, which is really important to hear and to really learn from the workers' perspective. And what I love about this panel is we actually have different perspectives and different action points and priorities and action plans. So now in this last final round of quick reflections, I want to ask, how can we create some priorities? Where to start? How to create action plans moving forward? What are the impact pathways? So in the last question, again, I want to start from Emma with the brand's perspective. So Emma, what do you think, what is the biggest enabler? How should we prioritize some actions? And what do you think we actually need from your perspective to unlock this big change?
I think the biggest unlock that we see is engagement and awareness, and that's with every stakeholder. So it's not just our supply chain stakeholders, it's also our customers, like investors, anyone in the business community, and to provide information on how their own purchasing, their own behaviors will impact change. And I think that is so important for being able to enable collaboration to happen, because you can't do it if you don't have an engaged stakeholders. They're just not interested. So it's very important to bring everyone on along the journey with you, that whether that's, you know, engaging suppliers in why you might be asking for reporting, why you might be wanting data on workers' wages. You know, it's about building trust with that, and that means engagement. And then you can actually move into collaborating on something. So you've come to the same page together, that you can actually move forward and say, well, how does this work for you? This is a shared goal, but, you know, what does this mean for the part that you play? And understanding where they're coming from really can enable that collaboration to actually turn into action.
Thank you, Emma. Brilliant. And moving forward, Rubana, your reflections, please.
How to change the direction of this. I think we should have a safe space for all three stakeholders where we can talk about changing the dynamics. And I think massive counseling is needed for all parties, and I seriously mean it, because workers who have been hardened by a lot of cruelty and hardship are obviously, you know, their stance is, it's very inflexible also. At the same time, owners who have always thought about workers just being employees also need to change their perspective, and brands need to also step in. But most of all, we need an honest and a transparent conversation. For instance, our salary books are all open to the brands. So if they want to take a look, they can. This kind of, I think it's important for us to ensure that 100% transparency is there and that there's honesty in the discourse. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Rubana. And Thivya, last but not least, from the workers' perspective, what do you need the most? What could enable you to actually own this transformation? How can we help you further?
Yeah, I I strongly believe there is a lot of knowledge among Global South trade unions, climate activists, and worker collectives about solutions for the climate crisis and living crisis we are facing today. There is still very limited space for their voices in important international discussions and forums, and this as a first step really needs changing. They are once facing the brunt of both crises, and it is important that we create spaces which are accessible for them and where they are not seen merely as victims, but also change makers with ideas and solutions. We need to invest in them and create solutions with them, not just for them. In the context of garment supply chains, we need them to be at the table, developing policies, laws, and thinking through programs with brands and suppliers if we want to make genuine progress. We understand the difficulties that different actors are facing and strongly believe that an ecosystem for fair purchasing practices has to be created in this industry if we have to address our individual and collective worries. I strongly believe that through social dialogues involving local and global actors and developing locally specific binding agreements and policies, we can address the multiple issues that are harming these industries. Thank you.
Thivya, thank you so much. I think your sentence encapsulates all this vision. You said something so important. Workers are not the voiceless victims. They should be enabled to become the change agents. And the change will actually come from the grassroots initiatives. So my pledge to the industry, my request to everyone that listens to us, we need to empower social dialogues, and those social dialogues must be with plural voices. Trust, engagement, transparency, collaboration, all these things are quite possible, but we just need to really change the way we frame things. And we have to change the way we structure the fashion system, because we need those voices, suppliers, manufacturers, workers. They have knowledge, they have information and ideas. Let's listen to them, let's empower them, because the decarbonization or just transition must have a purpose for the greater good, not for self-interest. So if the industry wants to become serious about decarbonization or social improvements, let's make sure that we are actually bringing those voices to the spotlight to learn, also to set these objectives collectively for the greater good, not for the self-interest for some power holders. So thank you very much, Emma, Rubana, and Thivya. It has been wonderful having you and hosting you. I am really pleased and honored to be in your company. So thank you very much. And we will continue the conversation with the Q&A session. But now I really want to bring Karen to this amazing conversation just to ignite some further provocative discussions with the Q&A. Karen, welcome back.
Thank you so much, Hakan, and thank you to all the speakers. What a very lively conversation. Exactly what we are aiming here to do at the Industry We Want, really having these challenging yet constructive conversations where we come out of it with much wider understanding for each other, rather than, as Rubana was saying, this vicious blame game that we've been stuck in for quite some time. So now I'm very happy to see that there's been a few questions that have come in from our participants, and it seems to have been a nice division for all of our speakers. I did see that Rubana had a chance to kick off one of the first questions, but we'll bring that and answer it live as well. But perhaps a good way to start is just to the question for Emma. Brands typically limit their concrete actions due to cost reasons. For example, what I expect is that the profit contradiction of some big brands will result in cutting the efforts on sustainability. Could you give some elements that suggest that actually the cost of sustainable choices is not globally higher than the cost going on with traditional practices?
That's a really interesting question, because I think it depends what you're looking at cost. You know, in the short term, choosing a more responsible material or going with a factory that is paying a higher wage, that can have a higher cost. But that's the short term, because actually the total cost of going with a more responsible choice might actually provide longer term savings. The legislation that's coming, and some that's already here, is imposing it on brands. So also that's really important to see not just your price per item, but actually the cost of not making those changes into that item. So this could be resource consumption, it could be lower energy use, decreased waste, it could be a more robust supply chain. So actors and mainly workers that are in stable employment with decent conditions. That means you get better quality because they have a better quality of life. It could also be risk management aversion, so you're kind of protecting yourself in the future. But I think the challenge that we've seen with slower investments or small sustainable collections has been that there isn't actually a broader idea of what that cost will be to the business, and it should be looked at in a more holistic way.
Thank you so much, Emma. Now building off on the discussion that we've just had as well, and I just see that there's been a bit of a back and forth already around the mass cancellation during COVID. This, I think, would be a good question to you, Rubana. Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I didn't finish it. I just wrote one line and then I decided to answer it live.
Has there been any improvements in purchasing practice contracts to limit these unfair practices by buyers? And then perhaps maybe you can elaborate, because there was a bit of a question on, is your factory able to pay fair living wages to workers? Or are you also limited by these legal wages? I think it would be nice perhaps to try to answer them together.
Both. Yeah, sure. So to answer, yes, our factory pays fair wages and not just minimum wages, but it's certainly not living wage. And we cannot pay living wage at any cost without the buyers giving us enough money. So unless there are fair prices, linked with fair practicing, fair practices in sourcing, it becomes very difficult, in fact, impossible for anybody to do anything about that. So that's one. Bruno asked me whether GSP could be linked and revoked because there's a violation of human rights. So I kind of told Bruno that, you know what, you have to then link it to, again, fair prices, because it's more on the brand's shoulder and not on the suppliers. So you would have to really, so EU due diligence should be looking more into fair prices in terms of purchasing practices, instead of just ticking the boxes. That's one. As far as mass cancellations go, yes, most of the buyers have become really decent. They're more of partners now. But it's also true that most of them have learned to handle the situation better. They work around. So if there's any negotiation, like if somebody is placing a huge business, they'll come back to us and say, can you give me a discount because I'm giving you so much business? And because we're hungry for orders, automatically we take that. So you see, that's how the prices go down. And then when we ask for price increase of a particular product, the buyer says, but you've been doing it for seasons. You should be more efficient. You should be rather reducing more prices. So more, going down and hitting the rock bottom isn't the answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Rubana. No, I think that is well articulated, and in looking at purchasing practices, indeed, that is the only way to really create that space in order to be moving more towards fair wages and living wages. Now there are some other questions, just quickly looking at the ones that are open that I think might be nice for Dr. Hakan, actually, really looking at the economic fundamentals at David Hackfeld's question. trade data shows that purchasing practices in real term decreases. This means that the distribution of value becomes more unequal along the global value chains. To break this vicious cycle, would it not be required to agree on minimum product prices such as $4 as a minimum price for a t-shirt manufactured in Bangladesh and in parallel for other places and products, and having both brands and suppliers committing not to undercut these minimum levels? And would also like others on our panel to reflect on this one. It's definitely not only for Dr. Hakan, but I think considering your research and everything, you are well positioned to give us some expertise or some insights on this.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. It's a great question. It is a question that we should all be also to the stakeholders in a more louder way. Can you hear me? Is all good? Okay. So purchasing practices are not responsible at all. We are still driven by cost reduction. And unfortunately, we are still not putting living wage dimensions to the formula of purchasing prices. So what I am seeing in industry, still cost reduction is the driving force. It's because actually the logic of the system is so on economic development. So still companies and brands are trying to actually make profits at the expense of the workers. How this should be actually activated and how this should be changed, we need social dialogues. We need to come up with minimum prices below which we shouldn't agree or we shouldn't even accept these conversations. So what I am seeing is at the end of the day, we don't have financial transparency. But also, can I tell you one thing? We need financial transparency between brand and manufacturer, but also we need the financial transparency between the manufacturer and the workers. So responsibility is not just on the brand's shoulder. It is a systemic issue. It is a sectorial conversation. We have to make sure workers are empowered. So living wage is a very complicated construct for which we should be working all together. But again, responsibility is a cross-sectorial thing. We really need to make sure we have transparency at all of these stages. Last but not least, for decarbonization, for sustainability, the game is absolutely rigged. Certifications, qualifications, tools, everything is actually making some power holders become even richer. I'm not going to sugarcoat this conversation here. I have to be responsible for everyone in the system. Suppliers need to pay an incredible price to be in the system, to be actually chosen by the brand. And brands are still not approaching this as a holistic issue. We are still seeing actually top-down governance structures whereby suppliers are forced to use certain tools for which they have to pay the price, along which we also need to provide certifications, extra audits, this and that. At the end of the day, the system is absolutely not empowering the supply chain stakeholders, and we have to change this. Supply chain finance solutions are needed, and brands should be responsible and more active in the space to also create conversations with the governments and also financial institutions at large to make sure financial solutions are provided not as loans or debts to the suppliers. There's a difference between giving debt or providing an incentive to the supplier. So these things are different. That's why I really urge everyone to create more social dialogues. So then we can actually understand how these conversations cannot be hijacked anymore by the brands or by the associations. We need people like Thivya and Rubana at every conversation to make sure we really hear all the perspectives. But of course, Emma, you're always welcome because you are brilliant. So I didn't want to exclude you. So the supplier's perspective are always needed. And it was a really, I would say, vague answer because the topic is really, really complicated. But in the chat box, I provided some scientific contributions, and some of those questions could also be illustrated in those articles. And I am more than happy to stay in touch with some of the guests and some of the participants should they have any further questions. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Dr. Hakan. Really appreciate it. And if there's any one of the other speakers that would like to reply to this question, otherwise I will move on to a question for Thivya that connects very well to this question, I would say. Do you see a role for workers to be included in giving big feedback together with suppliers to brands on their purchasing practices, especially impacts on working conditions? And if yes, how can we include them more in this feedback loop?
Yeah, I think brands know that the issue with workers The problem is well known now after so much research. Now we need solutions, and we have seen binding agreements with all actors is what knows. This is the case with Bangladesh, Accord, and Dindigal agreement. So we should move towards that. That is what would be my response. Already we have binding agreements, which is being a role model, like ensuring the ultimate safety and responsibility for the workers. I think all the eyes in the supply chain should take a way forward towards that.
Okay, thank you so much, Thivya. Now, perhaps going back to the conversation and discussion on living wages and fair wages to Emma, could you share, without putting the responsibility on others in the supply chain, what are the concrete steps that you are taking to ensure living and fair wages, considering Pangaia is making sufficient profit? A quick Google search showed that there is profit.
Of course. So I think we've discussed the power imbalance that exists, and we acknowledge that a lot. Like Pangaia doesn't pay people's wages directly in the factories that we work with. So that doesn't absolve us of responsibility, though we are buying at a certain price, and we need to be engaged within what is going on in terms of wages and benefits, I would say. So you look at the whole livelihood package. We have an approach to living wages and how we want to get there in the supply chain, and it consists of 5 kind of key steps that we want to move through. Understanding our landscape, so what is going on in terms of collective bargaining, the engagement of trade unions in setting wages, the economic fluctuations, anything like that. Then identifying the living wages. So we work with Wage Indicator actually for their benchmarked data to make sure that we're getting valid sources that also include a family living wage, which is very important to us. Then our next step is measuring this gap. So what is the difference of how much a worker is taking home in their pocket versus the landscape of minimum wage, the living wage, and some discussion of fair wages, but we prefer to stick with national minimum wages and living wages. Then taking action, the hardest part of this roadmap is actually how do we transfer this, not just from what is being put into the worker's pocket directly, but like how is it getting there, and is it verified that it's getting there, because that's very important to this plan. So we've got a couple of things that we've been doing in this part that we're trialing, because we actually don't think that there is an easy route to ensuring that fair wages are being paid. As a brand ourselves, we are certified living wage employer, but that doesn't reach our further down our supply chain, it's more upstream. So we have started piloting with fair trade, which is really interesting. A new exploration into this is we started in 2023 and we're rolling out in 2024. This is to look at a different way of workers receiving more contribution towards their wage, so directly baked into our price, which is important, and it's a cost Pangaia is bearing. Then, of course, there is more kind of brand engagement with others that are in factories. So we are not the only brands sourcing from particular factories. So it's about coming together and understanding what collective power we could have as brands in terms of our leverage there and asking for more. And this has to be in dialogue with the suppliers and with the workers. Their voices are key. Then there is our purchasing practices. So Pangaia has been a member of the Responsible Purchasing Practices Learning and Implementation Community for the past 18 months. It's been a fantastic opportunity to understand more about how practices that we are taking ourselves in terms of payment terms, in terms of cost setting, price negotiations, even implementing things like open costings has been able to invite a dialogue of understanding the labour costs, which is so important for any brand to do. And then finally, as part of all of this journey, it is reporting and sharing our learnings with others. So this roadmap is continuously evolving, and we need to share where we've succeeded and where we haven't, because it's such a complicated landscape for any brand to start engaging with, but it doesn't mean avoiding it. It means actually getting in and trying some things. And do you know what? Some of them have been a success for us, and we're quite happy to see, for example, our understandings of fairer prices that are not hard on negotiations and that we do not touch labour costs has been something that we are very proud that have been ring-fenced for Pangaia, but it doesn't mean that that's the only opportunity that we should explore, and that's why we're trying various different ways to close the gap. Hopefully that addressed the question a bit, but also encourage anyone to have a look at our latest social impact report for some numbers if you want to see some data around it.
Thank you so much, Emma. I just want to invite others, if you would like to build on what Emma was saying or reflect a little bit in the panel. I don't want to cut it off short because I do think that it was really good input. I do see that we have only a couple minutes left and several questions. I've gone through them right now, and I think we can go through one or two more, but I want to give the space to potentially others reply to Emma's intervention. No? Okay, then I'll just move on to a question that I think might be interesting as well to other brands or those that might want to be in compliance or look at what's happening with the CSDDD. It's related to, sorry, just moving up really quickly. What do, from the different perspectives, brand, manufacturer, academic, see the role for MSIs, such as Ethical Trade Initiative, ETI, SAC, the Fairwares, FLAs? What is the role for MSIs, or what do you see could be a valuable role for MSIs? Let me kick you off. Yes, Dr. Hakan.
Thank you very much. I will be really brief. They are fundamental, but it must be inclusive. It must represent all the voices. Otherwise, if it is just one perspective's representation, then it is a hijacked conversation. And we have seen time and again, these initiatives are important, but we have to empower the workers and the manufacturers, for which inclusion is the key. And the purpose must be really transparent, not for the power holder, but for the entire system. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Maybe I'll look at you, Dr. Rubana. Would you give a few words on that question?
No, I think Dr. Hakan absolutely said the right thing. I think many initiatives have been hatched over the last couple of decades. But I think, like he said, it cannot be a hijacked conversation. I'm just going to be echoing that. It has to be all-inclusive and it has to be transparent. It has to be fair. There cannot be any fear factor in disclosure. I think that's more important, and we must address the trust deficit that we have in the sector amongst ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, trust efficiency. Very well said. May I look towards you, Emma?
Yes, I think as was mentioned earlier, that safe space, very important, but MSIs also are key in bringing people together that perhaps are already engaged. So I think there's also need to bring in others that are not already operating in those spaces. So you are hearing from a more diverse range of suppliers, subcontractors, different actors throughout the supply chain, and those brands that perhaps are not currently engaging on any MSI stage.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just heard, unfortunately, Thivya has a bit of an issue with audio, so she won't be able to reply to this question, but I want to thank all of our wonderful speakers and moderators for this very engaging Q&A and great session. Look forward to seeing many of you in upcoming deep dives, as we will be doing other webinars, really going into the data. But for today, this will be all. Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you at other The Industry We Want events.